Shabbat Shalom. I'd like to welcome everyone here today. May God bless you and enrich you and fill you with His Spirit. May your joy be unspeakable and full of glory. To you, to your loved ones, happy Hanukkah. So we're going to talk about Hanukkah part 3, the Maccabees. Now, who doesn't love the Maccabees? Other than the Greeks, who doesn't love the Maccabees, right? So Hanukkah, which means dedication and rededication, well, suffice it to say, the Maccabees are the family that enshrines this concept and magnifies this idea. So today we're going to take just a brief look at the Maccabee families as we enter into the story of Hanukkah. We've been on this for a couple weeks now, but they will inspire you to be courageous, to stand strong, not only for Israel, for the Jewish people, but for each other. The theme of Hanukkah is all about the freedom to worship God according to His ways. And so this is truly a significant time that we're in. Remember, you are never alone. You are the happy few. Just like they were few in number and we are few in number, nonetheless, we are chosen of God and we are valued and esteemed by Him, and He watches over His people in spite of all the stuff, the crazy stuff that's going on both here and around the world. So I hope that Hanukkah will inspire us to be better neighbors and to be more dedicated to God and to His ways. So last week we saw Antiochus Epiphanes was simply another Antichrist who, of course, hated God, hated His people, and hated His law. We also saw that Antichrists, like Antiochus Epiphanes, they use civil and religious authorities to legislate wicked agendas that counter and destroy the ways of God, and also to persecute the people of God and those that associate with them. So today we're going to take a brief look at Mattathias, Maccabee, and his glorious family. It is the story of moral courage, and we need that today now more than ever, right? Moral courage, covenant faithfulness, that we'd be faithful to the covenant, and also that we would be men and women of great faith, standing up against all odds, not compromising on the love of the Father and His love for this world, for His Messiah, and for His ways. So, seeing that Hanukkah means dedication and rededication, the Maccabees are going to be the illustration today of that. So let's take a look at their crisis of faith and what we can learn from that and apply from that. So I'm going to jump into 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 15 through 28. I encourage you as families to read at least the first 5 chapters of the first book of Maccabee. You want to read the first 5 chapters because really in that 5 chapters, they give you the overview of all of the drama. And then they pick it up and go into depth through the rest of the book and also the second book. This is the week of Hanukkah. Please share these stories with your family. Read them every night. Read a couple chapters every night. Light some candles, read them, and get this idea into your hearts and the hearts of your children. So this is a little bit, because we don't have enough time, it's just going to be a little bit choppy because I'm jumping right into the story. Now, I'm going to try to end a little early because I have a video I want to show you. And I want to apologize up front. We were going to just stream it in high definition, and all the software, if the software senses that you're on more than one monitor or whatever, then you can't do it, and that's copyright issues. So anyway, we got a lower resolution version off YouTube that we will play for you at the end of the service. I think you'll still love it, even though it's not high def. The purpose and the meaning of what I'll share is very important. Okay. 1 Maccabee, chapter 2, verse 15. So Antiochus Epiphanes has already ransacked Jerusalem and the temple and plundered the people, and he's just been devastating. And he's lording over Israel, and he's trying to extend that not only throughout Jerusalem and the neighboring towns, but all the way through the borders of Israel. And he's pretty much gotten away with that up to this point. He's been going around to different cities, finding the most influential men and women, and there he brings them out into the public squares, and he basically has them sacrifice a pig on an altar in honor of him because he believes he's God on earth. He believes he's basically a Messiah figure on the earth, the ultimate one. And so he's trying to get all of Israel to give him homage and as he lords over them. And so he comes to a city way outside, close to the border, Modin, and he's going to find the person who's the most influential, and he does. So he sends this entourage of his men out there to contact him and to get him to do what has already been done in many, many cities. And people have caved in fear and intimidation. They have caved, and they have given homage to this wicked ruler, and they are living in great terror and fear. So we'll pick up the story. The king's commissioners who were enforcing the apostasy came to the town of Modin for the sacrifices. Many Israelites, verse 16, many Israelites gathered around them, but Mattathias and his sons drew apart. The king's commissioners then addressed Mattathias as follows: "You are a respected leader, a great man in this town. You have sons and brothers to support you." Now I want you to think for a minute. God is the one that gives us the power to become wealthy. Moses tells us God is the one that gives us the ability, the intellect, the opportunities to become the head and not the tail, to become influential, because he wants us to influence the nations for him, for his plan to redeem everyone, to restore the blessings to humanity that were ripped off beginning in the Garden of Eden, right? And so we have influence. And that influence is meant to be used either for good or for evil. And this wicked ruler is finding the people of influence because he knows that what they do, the people will also do. So he's found Mattathias, this strong family, very devout family, lovers of God, lovers of God's ways, and now he's going to use him for his wicked agenda. I want to encourage you. Every one of you has influence. We all have influence. Some of our circles are smaller than others, but nonetheless, we have influence, and our influence is growing. If we're serving God and we're full of faith, that will grow. God will give us more influence. What are you doing with your influence? Are you the light of the world? Are you letting the light of God shine forth? Are you loving those around you, serving those around you? Are you calling out those who are full of hate and hurt? Yeah, that's what it means to use your influence for the glory of God. So here we are. 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verse 18. The commissioners say to Mattathias, "Be the first to step forward and conform to the king's decree." You be the first. You, Mr. Influence, Mrs. Influence, right? You step out first and you conform to the king's decree. You know, this agenda never changes. Every Antichrist has this general agenda. And we see that in society, in every age, actually, in every place. And it's the spirit of the world trying to get everyone to conform to its ways. And God says, no, I'm here to redeem the world. Don't conform to the world, conform to my rule and my reign, my ways. I am good, I'm benevolent, I'm full of love. Step first, you, come forward, conform to the king's decree, as all the nations have done. Yeah, don't you just want to belong? Aren't you tired of just standing out? Always being persecuted because you're different? Why don't you just conform? Everyone else has. Why don't you do that as well? Do you feel that pressure in your life all around you? You know, just be like everyone else. Quit being different. It'll go easy for you. This was the message that came through these commissioners to Mattathias. Goes on to say, "And the leaders of Judah and the survivors in Jerusalem, you and your sons shall be reckoned the friends of the king." Think of that title, Friends of the King. Think of what that would have done for this family in this new empire, so to speak, right? Would give them a tremendous advantage over everyone. Friends of the king. You and your sons will be honored with gold and silver and many presents. What do we call this? Bribery. Yeah. Selling your soul in exchange for some tangible benefit. Think about that. the pressure on this family would have been enormous, on this man. It would have been overwhelming. Can you think of what he was confronted with? Chapter 2, verses 19 through 20. Raising his voice, Mattathias retorted, "Even if every nation living in the king's dominion obeys him, each forsaking its ancestral religion to conform to his decrees, I, my sons, and my brothers will still follow the covenant of our ancestors." Yeah, live and let live. You know, religious freedom is all about the inalienable right to worship God according to our own conscience. And if you've chosen the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and his ways, you have that inalienable right to serve him according to his glory and his ways. And Mattathias says, absolutely not. We will follow the covenant. We'll stay faithful to the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of Moshe, of King David. We're going to stay true to the covenant. Verse 21, may heaven preserve us from forsaking the law and its observances. May heaven help us. You know, people, we need heaven's help. It is overwhelming for us and our children in the days that we're living. It's getting so crazy, so crazy. And they're after the next generation when you think about it. When you think about the agendas that are being taught, the politicizing of our public schools and the agenda of many of the social activists, and how contrary that is to the ways of God. And I'm saying, man, the next generation is at tremendous risk. Can you imagine the pressure of kids in schools today and what they face? How do they stay true to the ways of God? With heaven's help. When we pray and cry out, God, save us, we beseech thee. Watch over us. Keep us in spite of the growing pressures all around us. Like the Maccabees, champion our cause to stay committed to your ways. As for the king's orders, verse 22, we will not follow them. We shall not swerve from our own religion, either to the right or to the left. Now, you know what? That takes a lot of courage. In light of the fact that this ruler is a tyrant, and he's enforcing his agenda by death. That this meant for them, surely, death. They were not in a constitutional republic where you can shout these things out and still remain protected by the laws of the land. This would cost him and his family their very lives. This is a sublime courage. This is courage raw and undefiled. 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 22 through 25. As he finished speaking, a Jew came forward in the sight of all other to offer sacrifice on the altar in Modin, as the royal edict required. So a fellow Jewish person stepped forward to do what was being asked, and he probably did that in light of the fact that probably all of them were going to die that day. And so with a good heart and the intent to, preserve their very physical lives, he came forward to do what Mattathias refused to do. It says when Mattathias saw this, he was fired with zeal, stirred to the depth of his being. He gave vent to his legitimate anger, threw himself on the man, and slaughtered him on the altar. At the same time, he killed the king's commissioner, who was there to enforce the sacrifice, and then tore down the altar. Now, I want to say, immediately on the heels of this, that the ethic and strategy of Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, is radically different. Okay? Nonviolent confrontation. I'm not in any way advocating that you use violence to preserve your rights. Don't do that. But the story is important, and it's a different setting. It's not a constitutional republic. So if you understand the contexts, you can bring the principles out of the story and still apply them. Now, there is an exception to the rule. If you're in law enforcement and or in the military, then you can use violence appropriately for the right reasons. Does that make sense? Think of the revolution against the tyranny from Britain. Think of the Civil War and what was necessary then. Think of World War II and the responsibility to rise up and save the Jewish people from the tyranny in Germany and their little horn in Berlin, Adolf Hitler, and his agenda to annihilate them. Yeah, there is a time for that. But as individuals, as citizens, it doesn't apply to us. So please do not use violence outside of those contexts. 1 Maccabees chapter 2:26, in his zeal for the law, he acted as Phinehas had against Zimri, son of Salu. Now I want you to keep in mind that Phinehas was part of the law enforcement of God's priesthood. So there was a part of the priesthood that actually had the authority to take lives if people were encroaching on the holy place. But only they could do that. If you think of the law enforcement of the priesthood, then you'll understand that. Again, law enforcement and military can use this type of violence, but not us as citizens, of course. Maccabees 2:27, then Mattathias went throughout the town, shouting at the top of his voice, let everyone who has any zeal for the law and takes his stand on the covenant come out and follow me. Now the principle is this. God calls us to come out of the nations, to come out of the ways of the nations, the ways of this world, and to stay faithful to him, to embrace his ways and become a light unto the nations. And so this call of Mattathias rings true even today in 2019. You and I, we're called to covenant faithfulness, to walk in the ways of God in contradistinction to the ways of the world, to the ways of our society that are in conflict with his ways. Verse 28, then he fled with his sons into the hills, leaving all their possessions behind in the town. This brings us to that connection that we see in the life and times of Jesus the Messiah, the Jesus Hanukkah connection. We've spent quite a bit of time on Jesus, traveling from Galilee in the winter, several days' journey, just to be in Jerusalem during Hanukkah to reveal that he is the Messiah. At the festival of light and revelation, he revealed himself as the Messiah. And there's another couple places where he identifies with the theme of Hanukkah. One of those places is Matthew 24 and verse 15. So let's read Jesus in context. This is the prophecy of the coming desolation of Jerusalem and the temple at the hands of Rome. And so speaking to his followers, he says in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. So the context of Jesus' words is this phrase, the abomination of desolation, which is actually a quote from Daniel. And we've been talking about Daniel and his prophecy of what was coming to the Jewish people under the little horn of Greece. And it did. It came. That's what the Maccabees is all about. He came and he defiled the temple and destroyed the city. And Jesus is saying, when you see the abomination of desolation, let the reader understand. In short, what Jesus is saying is, you need to understand what happened during the time of the Maccabees, what Daniel prophesied, because it's coming again. There's not just a little horn in Greece, but Daniel says there's another one tied into the fourth empire, which was the Roman Empire. The very empire that was ruling and even oppressing Israel at this very time. And Jesus is saying it's coming again. It's going to happen again. This whole thing will play out just like it did before. Let the reader understand. Because if you can understand what took place, then you can escape this before it comes. And what abomination was Daniel speaking of? Of course, the one of Antiochus Epiphanes, the very abomination that he would bring. So jumping back to 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 54. This is what this ruler did once he took over the city and the temple. On the 15th day of Chislev, In the year 145, the king built the appalling abomination on top of the altar of burnt offering. Now, keep in mind that Chislev corresponds approximately to the month of December. So it's in the winter, probably in December, that he puts up the abomination of desolation in the temple area where the altar was. This is what brought desolation and defilement to the holy place. Verse 54, it goes on to say, and altars were built in the surrounding towns of Judah, incense offered at the doors and houses and in the streets. Any books of the law that came to light were torn up and burned. Whenever anyone was discovered possessing a copy of the covenant or practicing the law, the king's decree sentenced him to death. Month after month, they took harsh action against any offenders they discovered in the towns of Israel. This agenda has been played over and over and over throughout human history, most recently in Germany's Holocaust, of course. These are lessons that we need to learn. And part of the lesson is to stand up early and speak out and push it back into the darkness so that it never, ever gains the power that we've seen over and over and over in history. 1 Maccabees 1:59. Then on the 25th day of each month, sacrifice was offered on the altar erected on top of the altar of burnt offering. On the 25th day of each month. Now, I don't want to say too much about the 25th day of the month, especially of the month of December. You know, I just thought I would make the comment about it's interesting that his time of exalting his own agenda would happen to be the 25th of each month. Now, when you think of Jesus cluing his followers into what Antiochus Epiphanes had done and saying that it's going to be replayed in their immediate future, that probably caught their attention. So in Matthew 24 and verse 15, let's go on to read this. It says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, just like Antiochus, the Roman emperor, will bring his own renowned military, just like Antiochus brought his armies to Jerusalem. Rome's going to do the same thing, and they're going to crush the Jewish people, their city, and their temple. In fact, Jesus says, if you look at the parallel in the Gospel of Luke, this is how Luke records it. He has Jesus saying, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Fascinating when you think about it. He goes on to say, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things that are out, that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. In other words, he's saying, when you see the armies of Rome, get out. Don't hesitate. You're going to have a window of time to get out, and then it's over. Now, when you read the account that Josephus gives us of 70 AD, it's amazing. They put a siege around the city, and that siege closed the city off, and you couldn't get out for nothing. And they ran out of supplies because they didn't estimate enough time to choke off the city and get it to surrender, and nor did they understand the courage of the Jewish people, right? So what they had to do is they had to retreat until they could get more supplies in order to put the siege for the time they needed to destroy the city. So when they opened up the siege, what do you think happened? Do you think that the Messianic Jewish followers of Jesus remembered his words? Yeah. You know, just like Father Maccabee, the minute he took his stand, he realized, okay, we better get out of this city because we know those armies will be here soon once they get word of what we've done, right? And he fled with his kids to the hills. And then many joined them later. That's the ongoing story. Jesus is saying, you better understand what Daniel prophesied. Just like the Maccabees fled, you're going to have to flee too. Because this army, like Antiochus, is a super military power. So you better get to the hills. Matthew 24:19. But woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. Of course, that would make the flight very difficult. Think of the Shabbat Halacha in the first century. How difficult it would be to flee the city of Jerusalem, especially if the gates are shut on Shabbat. Yeah, this is going to create some dilemmas, and he's saying, pray that this doesn't take place within that timing. It'll make it even more difficult. Matthew 24:21-22. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not has occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless the days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Josephus says it was the worst thing that has ever happened to the Jewish people. And it was. In fact, there's never been a greater horror than that in Jerusalem to this very day. To this very day. The siege was so strong, and there's so many corpses in the city, and they hung them on the walls to intimidate the people. They got to the place where Josephus says that even the women were cannibalizing their infants. It was horrible in every way. Just like Jesus was trying to warn his people, all of that came to pass. The Messianic Jews, the followers of Jesus, the Jewish followers of Jesus, did they remember the words of Jesus? This would have been 40 years until this came to pass. Yeah, they saw the armies of the little horn of Rome circling Jerusalem. And as soon as they could, they got out of the city. They fled. They fled. You say, where'd they go? No one really knew where they went. You know, it took a Seventh-day Adventist scholar being invited to the Gregorian University in Rome to do his doctrinal dissertation under Vatican II. They had this new approach to Protestants where they were going to woo the Protestants back, and this was part of how they would do that. They opened up the Gregorian University, the most majestic of all of their universities in Rome, and they said, we're going to take applications. We're going to invite a non-Catholic scholar, the first of many, to come and study as we build bridges once again. There were so many applications that came in, and they made their way through all of those, and they chose this Italian-American Seventh-day Adventist scholar to come and do his doctrinal dissertation. And he did. And it shook the world. It was amazing. He writes the book From Sabbath to Sunday, gets a medal from the Pope, graduates summa cum laude. And part of this amazing thing that takes place is he finds some documents that had never been known even existed, because the libraries in the Vatican are so extensive, right? And so he comes up and he says, look, I found some documents that say that the Jewish followers of Jesus were found in Pella in the 4th century, thriving, flourishing. They're like, what? Where did you find those? They thought he brought those from America. They were like, those are fake, those are fun. He says, no, I found them in your libraries. So he showed them, and they did. They brought them out a couple decades ago, and the Protestants have been shaken up. The Catholics have been shaken up ever since. Because what it shows is that the followers of Jesus actually fled north to Pella, some 90 miles north, just like Jesus said. Flee to the mountains. They went straight up north through the mountain pass into Pella, and they were found there in the 4th century. One of the bishops of Rome writing about them, and then later his writings were discovered in the Vatican. And he goes on to say, and I'll just give you the short and skinny because I'm out of time, but it is amazing. He says, they're heretics. He called them heretics. They're the Nazarenes. They're part of this sect of the Nazarenes, and they're not Jewish because they believe that Jesus is the Christ, and they're not Christians because they keep the Sabbath and they circumcise their kids and keep the dietary laws, just amazing. But it shook up everyone because what it demonstrated is that the followers of Jesus not only loved God, but they loved his laws, his covenants, and they stayed true, even through the 4th century. So, let me jump down to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14. It says, here is a call for the endurance of the saints. those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Messiah or Jesus, their faith in Jesus, the Messiah. This is the earmarks of the Messianic community. Messianic Jews, Messianic Gentiles, those who view Jesus as the Messiah and embrace the law of God as a way of life. This is the call of the Maccabees, to stay true to the covenant. I want to encourage you today to stay true, not only to the Messiah, but also to the ways of God, to the appointed times, to the festivals. May Hanukkah be the time that we dedicate ourselves to being faithful to the ways of God, being faithful to the Son of God. So I'm going to close with this video here. Let me come down here, and we'll pick this up next week. We have part 4 next week. But we're going to end our live streaming at this point so we can show a movie clip of Henry V that illustrates what it means to stand against all odds. And so if you're watching via live streaming and you want to look at this video that we're going to show here but can't show live due to copyright issues, you can find the link in the description below. You just take that link below your video, click on it, and you can go and watch the clip that we're going to show. And then in the future, we'll put up the link, of course, for the future as we upload this video. It'll be there from this point on. Okay, so I think are we about ready, Pastor Chris? We about ready? Okay, so we're going to do the Aaronic benediction first. And then after the Aaronic benediction, please stay, and we'll give you about a 5-minute clip, and we'll make some comments at that point. So please stand for the Aaronic benediction.
And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And we add, in the name of Yeshua our Messiah, the Prince of Peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Receive now the name of Yahweh. Yivorechecha Yahweh ve'ishmorecha Yaher Yahweh panav elecha ve'ichunecha Yisa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha Shalom. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sirha Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.